On behalf of Brian and myself, I'm honored to acknowledge that we are currently recording on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe. The Anishinaabe include the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. CFS Counseling and Wellbeing and United Way Simcoe Muskoka respect Indigenous history and culture and are dedicated to moving forward in the process of reconciliation with all First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people.
Welcome to Resilience Rising, the show that shatters poverty myths, sparks optimism, and fuels innovative change through community-inspired discussions.
We're your hosts. I'm Amanda Fellows, Manager of Community Programs at CFS Counseling and Wellbeing.
And I'm Brian Shelley, the Chief Executive and Philanthropy Officer at United Way Simcoe Muskoka.
The title of today's episode is Indigenous Resilience, Reclaiming Dignity and Self-Determination. On today's episode of Resilience Rising, we travel to the heart of Indigenous resilience, exploring the ongoing journey of reclaiming dignity and self-determination in the face of systemic challenges and historical trauma. Our discussion centers on how Indigenous communities are breaking cycles of poverty through strength-based approaches and traditional wisdom.
I'm so pleased to introduce our guest today. Chenoa Lakai is a registered social worker who has dedicated her personal and professional life to supporting Indigenous children and youth at risk. Her private practice is called FACTS, which stands for Facilitation, Awareness, Counseling, and Training Services. Thank you so much for joining us today on Resilience Rising, Chenoa.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
So maybe before we get into this, how long ago did you found FACTS? How did this program come to be?
Well, this program came to be actually out of many years of working with Indigenous children and youth. I had just gained such a great momentum and a positive response that I wanted to take the work we were doing across more Indigenous communities. FACTS, my company, Facilitation, Awareness, Counseling, and Training Services, has actually only been around for about 2 years. However, in that time, I have been afforded the opportunity to work with different Indigenous child welfare agencies, healing lodges across Ontario, and most recently was just invited to speak at a conference out in British Columbia on behalf of the Canadian Association of Play Therapy. So
awesome.
It's been fun. It's been a fun 2 years.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah, that's
So
awesome.
you were raised with traditional teachings from both the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe nations.
Yes.
Could you explain how these traditional and natural laws guide your practice?
Absolutely. So I'm very lucky. My mother she has ancestry from the Seneca Nation, which means that from a very young age, I did grow up with those traditional teachings. Throughout my life, we were adopted into an Ojibwe family who then shared their ways of being and their traditions with us. And one of the coolest things that I found in growing up was that both Haudenosaunee and Ojibwe, or Anishinaabe nations, follow the same principles and natural laws. So having that as a foundation that guides my practice, those foundational laws really keep me on the positive, working towards empowerment and resurgence in our communities.
And I'm just considering that, some people might not know what those natural laws are, and I'm wondering if you could just speak to some of that so that it provides context.
Absolutely, I'm happy to. It'll make you laugh a little bit. It's such a simple concept that it bypasses most people in today's fast world. Our natural laws, we call them our natural Indigenous laws, but really they're laws of humanity. And what I'm referring to are 4 words, actually, that have a lot of meaning behind them. Our first law is the gift of kindness, to always remember to be kind to ourselves and others. Our second law is the law of sharing or generosity, so that we always remember to share that kindness with others. And our third law is honesty, so that we really honestly walk the talk, not just speak it, but actually live an honest way of life. And our fourth and final law is strength. And right now, that is the one, with kindness, I am most focused on in our communities these days, is regaining that strength that we've always had as people.
Yeah.
It's interesting, like when you speak about those things, so many of those laws are connected to resilience, right? The idea of resilience. So how do traditional Indigenous concepts of resilience manifest in contemporary Indigenous communities facing poverty and other systemic challenges?
That is an excellent question. And again, it really, for us, it's a really simple answer. It is reclaiming our right to practice those laws.
Right.
From the beginning of time, that is who we have always been. There are lots of different stories and histories when it comes to colonization, but the one that I hold to the strongest is the one that we still carry today. And it's that when we first met new people on this land, we were kind to them. And in all of our practices today, it really comes back to not just being kind to everyone, but being kind to ourselves within our own communities, which has become a struggle in intergenerational trauma.
Yeah, I think that is a huge piece. There's so much. I'm having so many thoughts as you're talking about how we could unpack some of that. And, recognizing we only have half an hour, I'm trying to manage what question I would ask. It's interesting. I think the intergenerational trauma piece is a core component too when we're talking about some of the systemic barriers or poverty in and of itself, or how poverty continues to manifest.
Absolutely.
I don't know, do you have thoughts on that, like about that key piece?
I do, and I will attempt to keep that short, as you said.
I'm sorry.
Keep a couple.
If we go overtime, there is no better topic, frankly, for us to go overtime
great.
into.
Yeah,
So happy to speak from your heart and share your thoughts.
Yeah.
So briefly on intergenerational trauma, we know that it is still alive and well.
Yeah.
We know that our Indigenous communities are struggling because throughout history they had lost their best practices and their ways of being.
Yeah.
So those natural laws, if we are able to bring those back to our communities, because we cannot assume that just because people are Indigenous that they have ever really learned those natural laws and ways of being. As a matter of fact, because of what has happened in history, they have not. So one of our biggest focuses in our communities is to really resurge those natural laws among the people, because Indigenous folks, there's a bit of a difference in our ways of being. And one of the biggest struggles we're having in communities is that we are living in a modern society. And you bet we are, and we do enjoy heat and water and warm clothes. However, within this modern society, when I'm in communities, most Indigenous communities are telling me that it's the way that society is working just doesn't fit right. Something is wrong and they can't figure out why it doesn't work for them. And I believe a big piece of that is because they do not have their original teachings. So if we were able to bring that back to our communities, it would really, really help in the healing. I'm not saying it would help tomorrow. This is something that, intergenerational trauma, we're going to have intergenerational healing.
For sure.
But if we're able to start working in those ways and really reconnecting Indigenous folks back to the land, which is where their connection really is, it would absolutely just change worlds and communities for us.
So when someone once said, if we think of how many generations of trauma have existed, it's going to take that many generations to reverse it, right? And so I think, and that's difficult, I think, in this society, in this world where we want quick fixes, right? And I think we have to sit with that. We have to sit with that as descendants of settlers as well, and understand that the damage, to reverse that damage, is going to take just as long as that damage was being enacted. And we think of how recently the last residential school closed, for example. We think of how recent the 60s scoop is. We think of how recent all this history is. This isn't going to be quick.
That's right.
It's hard work and meaningful work, but it's going to take a long time to reverse the damage that's been done. I'm wondering if you could share an example of an Indigenous-led initiative that has successfully combined cultural revitalization with economic empowerment.
Oh, I would love to. There are so many. We spoke about intergenerational trauma, but I also believe it's really, really important for us to speak about what is happening in Indigenous communities right now as well, because there is a really big shift. And the government has acknowledged that there are some work and repair to be done here, and we are on board with that. So what's happening is across Ontario, for sure, we have several Indigenous healing lodges that have opened. And what those healing lodges are doing are kind of exactly what we just talked about. They're bringing people in out of their communities, but bringing them into the healing lodges and teaching them and helping them to reconnect back to those lands and those places. And really revitalizing the spirit of Indigenous people and communities, allowing for those folks to go home. And it's like a ripple effect, right? They go home and they share what they've learned, and now their children know what they've learned, and their cousins know what they learned, and hopefully their grandchildren as well. But I would like to speak about one program in particular, if I may.
Sure.
It's not running right now, but it's one that I had the honor of being a part of. And the program is actually called Mistatim Medicine Horse. It was a really, really beautiful program that ran for about 10 years. And what it was the Indigenous communities, the youth in the communities, were asking for something for them. They were asking for programming that would help them learn who they were, away from cell phones, away from Wi-Fi. So a committee of folks got together and created a program on a horse farm, a beautiful horse farm with 115 acres, and spent 10 years bringing probably about 100 youth, Indigenous youth, and any youth that wanted to learn, onto their lands out to a wilderness camp, where the youth actually helped to build the wilderness camp. And the staff out there working the program, they lived on site with those youth, day in, day out, slept in tents out there with them, getting those youth back on the land. And it was almost like magic, watching what was happening with those youth, who many of them were coming out of justice systems, struggling in school, labeled as youth at risk. And you bring them out there and help them find their connection and build their skills back out on the land. We were trapping, we were working with horses, we were harvesting medicines. And the shift that came from that, I'm very privileged to have followed many of these youth for the last 10 or 15 years. It has changed their lives. And it was an 8-day program. That's all it took for them. 8 days of no Wi-Fi, no cell phones, no gaming, and really no wrong. It's us and it's nature out there.
How come it's not running anymore?
Funding. The funding actually, it became a struggle, and so a lot of those employees ended up actually working at healing lodges, because healing lodges now have the same type of structure and are doing very similar work. Specifically, the local healing lodge we have to Simcoe County here is Enotic Healing Lodge and Learning Center. And they right now are working on the land with youth and horses. So
great.
Very, very beautiful.
Cool. And where was the program located physically?
It was actually just located in Moonstone, Ontario.
Oh, amazing. So just up the road.
Yeah, close.
Cool.
So our podcast is like heavily focused on poverty, right? So we talk a lot about socioeconomic disparities, all of those across all the episodes. And we talked a little bit about residential schools, or we mentioned residential schools. Can you speak to the unique historical and ongoing experiences of Indigenous people in Canada, including the legacy of residential schools and the current socioeconomic disparities, and how they shape the concept of resilience in these communities?
I appreciate that last sentence. Otherwise, I was going to feel like I may repeat myself on that one.
Fair.
But I do really appreciate that last sentence, because you reminded me to speak to the resilience of what we've come through in all of this intergenerational healing. And I won't talk too much about residential schools, because again, I'm sure we could have several podcasts on that alone. But the beauty that I do see in our communities today, yes, we can talk about the negative effects, and they're real. They're very much real, and they're very much alive. And we do have young folks not understanding why their parents are behaving the way they are behaving.
Yeah.
As you said earlier, Brian, I mean, the last residential school closed, I was 13 years old.
Yeah.
Right? So this is not very far back in history. However, because of the trauma and the horrific things that happened, a lot of those folks can't or won't speak about those experiences.
Yeah.
So what's happening in our communities is we have the next generation coming up seeing the behaviors and the effects of that intergenerational trauma in residential schools, but never understanding why their families are the way they are. So one of the beauties, the other side of that, is that these young folks will not accept this behavior as normal.
Yeah.
We are watching this huge shift with the youth right now who are seeking answers. They want to know what happened, why it happened, and why our communities are the way they are in some areas.
And sorry to interject,
do.
but why do you think that's happening? Why is that switch happening now, that all of a sudden this isn't, it's not something we don't talk about anymore, but rather it's that young leaders or young individuals in community want to know, want to understand?
Well, that might be a little bit difficult to answer, but I'm going to do my best. Really, it's because it's the job of the youth. In our traditional teachings, a lot of people don't like, in society today, maybe don't like working with youth because they find them quite rebellious or they may push back. In our teachings, they're supposed to be like that. It's their job to push back.
Yeah.
And I think our generations now today, they've had enough. They don't want to watch the suffering anymore. They don't want to be living in impoverished situations with addictions and keeping the communities unchecked. The youth have had enough, and they're absolutely rebelling, and they're doing it in several different ways.
Yeah.
One of their acts of rebellion is coming to these programs like the horse program I spoke about, or to healing lodges, and they're learning the truth of what happened. And the beauty that's happening in that, and I'll try my best to quote the young man, but it was probably the most heartfelt statement I had heard, and I find it very fitting at this time. What he said was, now that I understand what happened, I don't hate my parents anymore. I don't hate my community anymore. I pity them because I understand what happened. And that to me is
Powerful
probably
words.
the most powerful thing I've heard in a long time.
And and is there a sense of hatred towards the system that did it? Because I think about if I think about the laws that govern
That's right.
your people
That's
and
right.
your communities, right? Which is on kindness and respect. So how does that mesh?
Well, here's something wild. Usually when the youth, the young folks first start to learn about history, there's definitely some anger there.
Yeah.
They're
understandably.
angry about what happened, and they're not understanding why. The beautiful shift in that is if you give them a space to voice that anger, you'll see how quickly that anger comes back to their natural laws. They're angry because they felt that people have been dishonest with them. They're angry because of the hurt that people have gone through, but they're still following their natural laws. They're not angry about society today, and they're not angry at every race that isn't Indigenous. They are upset with the system.
Yeah.
Right.
But what we try and work, when we work with youth, our biggest message is, but we also live in this system now, so we have to understand it, but it's up to us to change it as well.
Yeah.
So our biggest goal really is empowerment, to use that law of strength, and our youth emulate that.
Yeah.
It's absolutely beautiful to watch them. The young ones, the 15, the 16-year-olds, are not angry. They want change.
Yeah.
They want better. And for me, that's a lesson for the whole world.
Yeah.
If our youth and our teenagers can behave in that way, can't we, as adults, stop being angry, stop blaming, and just start looking at how we can work together?
Yeah.
So here's the big question. So you've spoken to these strengths of young people in Indigenous communities. How can these strengths be further supported and amplified at a national level, at a regional level, at a provincial level? How do we take this this strength and amplify it to affect change?
Well, we could start sending, no, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Really, I'm going to come back to the most basic, simple foundation. And my response to that is this right here, right now, you're doing it. You are walking alongside us. Indigenous folks, when we talk about land claims, when we talk about those rights, we're not asking for everybody to move off the lands and give those back to us. What we're asking for is access. We want to be able to go back out there and harvest our natural medicines, but we want to do that alongside everyone else.
Yeah.
Because again, those natural laws, they weren't for Indigenous people, they were for all of humanity.
Right.
And I do believe that when we have these conversations, when people open the door like both you have to have these open and honest conversations, when our youth know about things that are happening like this and watch this on TV, they're understanding we are being heard and there are people who care and people who will walk with us in this journey. Because we don't need to be rescued. We don't need to be saved. We need people to walk alongside us in this journey and to know that it's going to take a very long time.
Yeah.
We got to walk hand in hand because we need your strengths too. Right? We want to share that. We want to share what we have, but we also need your help. We need to know what you know and walk in a good way alongside with you. So really for us, it's coming back to those 4 laws. If we could all just be kind and share with one another, be honest with one another as we're doing, that's the strength. That is the strength in all of humanity.
That's a mic drop moment if I ever
Seriously.
heard one. Honestly. Yeah.
Wow.
You're incredible.
Well,
So,
thank you.
yeah.
I really appreciate that. I will tell you there's nothing I haven't shared with you or nothing I have shared with you that didn't come from someone else.
Yeah.
Right.
This is from my mothers, my grandparents, my aunties, and the folks who have always taught me. Everything I'm sharing with you is because they shared it with me.
Yeah.
So it's my job now. I was that rebellious youth pushing against the system and coming to understand that there are beautiful things about the systems that are there today. I do love education. Really fell in love with post-secondary. There's beautiful things out there, and the best way that I can find to change the system is to understand it and work within it, but in a good way.
Yeah.
In a very good way. You can't fight hate with hate.
Yeah.
And you just can't repair what's happened with hate or shame or blame. It's got to be love and it's got to be kindness. Yes, I said those things.
Well, look, if there's one thing this world needs more of right now, it's kindness.
Absolutely. And you know, kindness costs nothing. Absolutely nothing.
You keep having these amazing moments that I feel should be like the mic drop moment of the interview.
Should we stop there?
No, I think we want to give you the chance for one final thought, or one last thought. How can non-Indigenous Canadians, and you said walking alongside, but
Yes.
but you know, if we look at this, I hate to look at it pragmatically, but
Yep.
but how can non-Indigenous Canadians and organizations best support Indigenous-led efforts towards healing and resilience and economic empowerment, while respecting the principles of reconciliation and self-determination?
Good question.
That's why we saved it for last.
I'll give you a little more than the simplicity of kindness, though the simplicity is beautiful.
Okay.
Really, honestly, what we need is we need for people to listen and learn. We need for organizations and systems to actually be open to hearing us exactly in moments like this. Have us come in, talk to us. Right? Let us share this information with you and tell you what it is we need.
Yeah.
Because when there's an open, honest conversation in the bigger structures, in the bigger organizations, my hope is that there's a better understanding for what we're asking for. In today's day and age of social media, anybody can put anything on there and gain a large following. And I often watch that it's a self-righteous movement or a righteous movement. And that's okay. Everybody needs to express in their own way. But I don't see that getting anywhere.
Yeah.
We are past the days of standing front lines and blocking things, people are getting hurt that way.
Yeah.
We are past the days of blasting organizations and systems on social media. The system's not listening. They're not on social media. They're
Yeah.
bigger than that. But for me, in my perspective, we are right now in the days coming out of post-pandemic years where the biggest thing we need is connection. And it's not just an Indigenous connection. We've never lost our connection. We've still got that. We all need to be connected. And the best way we can do that is by sitting around tables and really speaking as human beings,
Yeah.
not as mainstream society or Western society and Indigenous society, but as one people. We all share these lands together. And we, for the majority, we're all pretty good human beings. If we could just sit down and have those conversations and really listen, because if we really listen to Indigenous communities, they're not asking for people to leave and get off the lands. They're not asking for the systems to be dismantled. They're asking for people to listen and learn so that together we can make changes that we feel will benefit all of society, not just Indigenous folks. Some of our systems, they're pretty old.
Yeah.
They could use some upgrades.
Sure.
We want to be a part of that. That's probably the biggest thing, is the invitation to the table.
Seems like such a simplistic need, or request.
It feels like it's a simplistic need, but again, in Indigenous communities, we talk a lot about elders or our old folks, our knowledge keepers. In our communities, those are our PhD holders.
Yeah.
Right, I'm sitting in front of you as a registered social worker, but as a woman and an auntie and a protector of children, I'm a master's degree in our society. What we need is that invitation and that recognition that just because we don't hold the knowledge from certain institutions, we do hold valuable knowledge. Ours is about the land we're living on every day.
Yeah.
And if we're going to be honest, folks, the way we're going on our earth today, and we're all watching it, this is not sustainable.
Yeah.
It's just not. So how can we make this better? And how do we do it together? Please understand that I am not saying that we need to go back to teepees and that way of being. I really do love turning on warm water. I do love getting in my car and driving over here. Had I saddled a horse, we would have been meeting tomorrow.
Right.
I would have done it. But what I'm saying is, let's talk together, let's build it together.
Yeah.
What a concept.
Yeah.
Chenoa, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us today.
You're so welcome.
Thank you to our special guest, Chenoa Lakai. From FACT, this has certainly been an education for myself and for Amanda, and I hope for you at home as well. Thank you also to our studio partners here at Rogers TV in Barrie. And finally, thank you to you, our viewers and listeners at home. Thank you for joining us and being part of this conversation today. In addition to being available on Rogers TV, the video version of Resilience Rising is also available on YouTube channels, and you can also download our podcast wherever it is that you get your favorite podcasts.
And we'll see you next time on episode 6 of season 2, when we discuss unlocking potential, empowering youth in transition. I'm Amanda Fellows of CFS Counseling and Wellbeing, with my co-host Brian Shelley of United Way Simcoe Muskoka, asking you to embrace innovative change to ensure our communities are great places to live for everyone. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're so welcome.